Well, good day everyone. So I got a quick update for you. We got the DR-Z 400 project we're working on. It is colder than snot here. We're having a very cold start to the October time frame. Anyway, so just wanted to show you a few things that we've been able to do on this bike. So this is the DR-Z 400 rear wheel. I've got the new D-Sport Adventure tires on here, and it cleaned up fairly well. I didn't spend a ton of time doing this. We're using this bike and we're gonna beat it up and stuff. And these rims are pretty old and haggard, but they still ride pretty true, and so they're pretty good that way. We've got the new bearings put in there, new seals, and actually I just noticed I got the seals in here backwards, so we'll have to fix that before we get that put on there. We got a new sprocket on here. Something I really wanted to show you was how scary this bike is, and this is something you want to be aware of whenever you're buying a used bike. Is, you know, you want to buy the bike, you want to get on it, you want to use it, you want to ride down the road, but something you should check every time, at least in my opinion now, is the sprockets, and the front and rear sprocket specifically. The rear sprocket didn't look too bad on this bike. They were bent a little bit on the splines and stuff, but they weren't that bad. The teeth weren't in terrible shape. There was like no real visible signs there. This chain was a little loose and stuff, and so that was a concern, but it wasn't, you know, detrimental or like that. But I wanted to ride this bike, make sure it could work, so I ran it up to 60 miles an hour, ran through all the gears a couple times, felt the clutch really good, let it warm up, let it cool down, that kind of thing. Made sure it was a decent bike. Well, this I didn't check, and I really should have. And if you can see that, especially this tooth right here versus every other tooth there, this front sprocket has only one tooth essentially left on it. All the other teeth are broken on it. That is a huge danger, and I cannot believe that I drove this at highway speeds with that sprocket on there. That was a huge oversight on my part, and that could have ended in a lot of tragedy. So that's something to be aware of. Of course, we're going to replace that with a new chain and a new sprocket, both front and rear, and get that fixed. But be aware of that when you're going to buy a bike. So just want to dive into a few things that I'm working on today. I'm going to start disassembling the shock. The rear shock was basically, if you push down on the seat, it would just spring up and down. You know, that's bad. You don't want that. This was a totally blown shock. So I've got a new seal, I've got a new valve stack, and then we'll go through it and see what we can get. I've got all the oils and things like that, and locally here in town I think I can get the nitrogen recharge. So we'll go ahead and tear into that shock, and I'll just show you how I do that. Please leave us a message down in the comments below if you've ever torn into a shock, or if you've ever found a sprocket like that, and some recommendations on, you know, when we should check those intervals. Most of the time I check my sprockets about every 5,000 miles on a dual sport. You know, let me know what you think on that. I imagine it depends on what kind of riding you do, but leave us that comment below. So of course what most people end up doing with this is you want to measure this shock, the spring especially, to see where it's at. This is at 10.5 inches. Just to note that, I doubt I'm going to be running it back to 10.5 inches. I imagine, I don't think this is a stiffer spring, but we'll see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to knock these rings here loose. So I got to work on the first one here. I'm actually going to completely disassemble this and clean it really good, but I want to get it apart first and take a look to see what we got dealing with here. If you couldn't tell what this is, it's just a punch. I believe this is the 1/4 inch, 5/16 pin punch actually. So just a punch is all. I've heard of people using chisels, but I'd rather not ding up these rings if I can avoid it. Should have brought this shock inside last night to let it warm up, to get it so it wasn't freezing cold when I'm working on it. This has, so you have a ring here, and then the body, I guess, the pushing body, and then there's supposed to be an O-ring back behind this ring here, so retainer or whatever you want to call it. So try maybe getting something that'll hold that up there. Just give her a little tap-tap-a-roo, little tappy. There it is. Okay, grab myself a little screwdriver here. And this is just a little O-ring. Yeah. Trying to be warmer by putting some bigger gloves on, but just gonna have to go with cold hands today. So that's our O-ring there. What you want to do, especially on a shock, is you want to lay things out on your countertop or whatever you have to work on, workbench or whatever. I like to use the philosophy of dropping lots of stuff. But in addition to that, I try to keep things on my workbench in the order I took them off. So you can see here, there's the spring and a whole lot of crap. Okay, so everything there looks all right, but you can see here, this is not how this should work. I shouldn't be able to do this. There's literally almost no resistance whatsoever in here. So yeah, this shock is totally blown. I've got new seals and things. So our next step is this this piece right here. It's just it's kind of pressed in. So again, I'll just give something to kind of degrease a little bit. Give it a little something something. And there's some little holes like this here. There's a couple of them. And you can just take a punch that's small enough. You know, this one's really too big for this, so I'm going to get a smaller punch. So we'll just get a smaller punch here, and we'll very carefully tap this thing up. It doesn't take a ton of pressure or anything like that. So go. So that's just a retainer, and then we've got the seal here. There we go. So what I did was I just pushed on the inside. They sell a tool that you can use to push in here and push down on it, but yeah, you can usually get it with your fingers. You know, there is something to be said for the gentleness of fingers, because at least mine. And so in here is another O-ring. So I'll reach here with a pick tool or a small screwdriver. Usually keep some of these real tiny bungee cords. There's lots of things you could use, of course, but some little bungees like this that I can use to hold stuff out of my way. There we go. That'll help. Okay. There we go. So there's another O-ring there. Now something probably important that I should talk about is pushing this down. If you do have a shock that's not totally blown like this one, this is a Schrader valve right here, and it is similar to like your bike tire or car tire. It's got a Schrader valve. Now if you have a vehicle, or if you have a tool to remove that valve, that's usually your best bet. Just remove the whole valve. That'll deflate that completely. That'll let a lot of the pressure off here, so you can get this released. But it's not terribly vital, but it would help to remove that. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of oomph here. I'm going to try to. It's probably because it's so stinking cold. That's okay, so keep in mind this is a compressed cylinder under pressure normally. You wouldn't want to do this under normal conditions. Where I know my shock is totally blown, you know, I'm not too worried about the pressure here. And I'm not putting a ton of heat on this. I just want to warm up this cylinder a little bit. Get a little bit of expansion. And I think the seal is actually what I'm really concerned about warming up here. Not necessarily the whole shock. I want to warm this up just a little bit, just to kind of loosen things up. Especially that seal. If that seal is all cold, it'll be harder than, you know, if it was warmed up. So. There we go. It's just warm now. I want to do this very carefully. Most of these components, I believe I'm replacing this component anyway, but there we go. So just trying to pull this out of here all in one piece and not to mess anything up. He's starting to come, slowly but surely. There she goes. Okay, so this is your seal body, I believe it's called, and this is our valve. So this is what does the actual, I don't know, dampening or whatever you want to call it. It softens up your ride. It's what provides resistance to the oil in there. And that thing is dry. Let me pull this off here and I'll show you. So not only is there's literally almost nothing in there, if you can see that there. Very little. So our next step is we're going to disassemble this other side here. So get my gloves off a little bit here. Since I'm WD-40'd up. And I do my best to try to keep my tools organized. I'm never very good at it, but I do my best. It helps when I'm doing a video because it reminds me to do more of that. So, first thing I'm going to do is remove this Schrader valve. Just to be absolutely certain that no air comes out of this. Actually, I just got a little puff, so it's a good thing I'm doing this. So there's the Schrader valve there. Just same as what you put in a bike. This one looks like it's got a brass top on it. I'm not sure if that means it's a higher quality one or what, but so we'll have that, and then push down on there. Just pushing down a little bit, there's going to be a another valve here, so okay, and I know my angle's not terrific for this, but so we're working on this. I've got another snap ring in here, so I'm going to use the same technique as last time. So what I'm going to do is I push the ring down so it kicks off on one side, and then I use another tool to kind of slide it up. So maybe I can move this around so I can show you how I do that. Hopefully you can see this. So what I'll do is just push this edge down. Once I've got that edge down, I take this other pick tool and shove it down underneath it, and then I can grab that O-ring and pull it up. Sometimes these can really fight you, so I figure any trick you can learn, the better. And you just pull that out like that. So I have one of these here. It's a valve stem removal tool, but it also has some pulling capability. So I'll screw this onto that valve stem, and then I've got some real handle to pull with. And just like that, there's our bladder, and it feels and looks like it's actually in pretty good shape. I was worried I was going to have to replace it. We'll see if it holds air when we get everything put back together. But we're going to do nitrogen on that, and the main reason for that is instead of just blowing it up is the nitrogen doesn't build heat like the like air would. So when you start working the shock a little bit, and I'm just going to barely screw in that Schrader valve into there just to keep track of it. And take a look here in the throttle body, so, or not the throttle body, but the down the chute here. And you can see there it's pretty dirty still. The oil they did have in here was pretty trashed. But looking at it, it doesn't look like it's in terrible shape. Looking at my clickers here, this moves freely. And this isn't terribly necessary to remove these rings, but I'm going to do it anyway. I want to really clean them good. So this is a Showa shock. This is on a 2002 DR-Z 400S. And it looks like this has been disassembled before, because there's a whole lot of scoring on these rings that I didn't put there. Maybe they just adjusted was just an adjustment on the sag that caused all those marks. But okay, so here's some things on this this shock. So here on the valve, you can see here they've pushed on this and they've spread out this end piece. This is meant to be put it in and never touch it again type of a thing. And I could just put this back together. I've got a new one of these valves, and new valves there, new O-rings for this, and put it back together and we're good to go. But since I've got it open, I went ahead and ordered somewhere here. I ordered some new shock shims. So as you can see right here, there's a bunch of layers of basically washers. They're called shims, and they change the characteristics of the shock. They determine how much these flex, allowing more or less oil into the shock on your compression side, which is when you get a big hit and this sits to the bottom of the bike like this. It sits in that shock body and it goes up. And when you compress that spring, compress the shock, it pushes down on this side, the compression side. Then you have the rebound side, which is the top side here. And so when you're doing a jump, or if you're going off of a bump or something and it wants to go down quickly, this determines how quickly that gets back down to the ground, or at least compensates for that. So changing those characteristics change how fast it compresses or rebounds. And so I hope that makes sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to change some of that layout and make this just a little bit better for off-road use, since that's the primary use of this bike. And I think overall, really, just trying to improve a little bit. They tend to be a little bit harsh for real chattery, high-speed stuff. So not that I do a ton of that, but I certainly want it as good as I can possibly get it. So what I've got to do here is I've got to grind down the top of this. Just the top of the nut and the top of this bolt, and this should come right off of here. It will not come off, otherwise you'll ruin this trying to get it off. So so that's my first step, is to do that. Go ahead and take this shock body off of here, and I'm going to grab a grinder, and instead of using a grinding wheel, which I think leaves a real rough surface, and it also takes a lot of material. Here's my grinder. what I'm going to use is one of these. Oh, I can just show it to you on here. It's called a tiger disc. So a tiger disc is basically sandpaper laid in a circle around there, and it just gives you a much better finish. It doesn't take off quite as much material, and I think I've got more control with it. It may be an illusion, but in my opinion, that's the better way to go. Okay, so you can see there, I just think it gives a nice, it almost looks polished or finished, you know. So anyway, so I'm going to lock this down in my soft joust here in the vise. And somewhere here, this is a 17, just so you know, and it comes right easy loose just like that. Okay. Now this is an extremely sensitive and delicate part of this. You've got to be extremely careful with the way you handle this particular part of the process. And the reason I say that is these shock shims are in here the valve shims are in here in a very specific order, and they've got to stay in this order and in this arrangement. You can massively ruin your ride if you don't. You can see I've got just a little bit of burrs and stuff there. I'll clean that up with a file here in just a few minutes. So anyway, so what I want to do, one of the easy things you can do for this is you want to use a bolt. And the other thing you can do with this too that's a smart way to go is you want to make sure you take video and pictures of how this all went together, and you can refer back to that. There's been several times that I've used that. So what I've got is a couple of big washers on a bolt. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remember that this bolt is going on the opposite of what's here. So I'll just take this bolt and set it on the top of this stack. Slide the whole thing off in one. Put another washer or a couple washers on there and spin a nut on there. And then all I have to do is remember that this is the orientation for this. The top of the bolt is on the top of this bolt, so this is opposite of what's here. And then I have my shim stack. When I go to reorder this and redo this and clean it all up really good, I can do that and not mess things up. So I'll set this down here on my list of parts here. Okay, and then we're going to pull this off. This is the valve, or this is the seal. So this is the seal for your shock. This sits up right there, and there's several parts to this. There's a little washer and things like that. But we have a new one of these with all new seals and everything. So, and you can see this seal's actually ruined. It's actually got some burring here, and it's definitely way loose on there. It shouldn't be that way. And you can see right here there's these indentations. I'm not sure if those are supposed to be there or not, but I went ahead and bought a new one of those. They're only like 30 bucks, so I wound up just buying a new one. We've got the rest of our shock here, and I'm going to lay these out in order. So we've got the valve, nut, and we've got our seal in the end, and then we got our bumper and a ring, and I think that's as far as I'm going to go. I could disassemble this further to do this, but there's no real need. Okay, so we're pretty much disassembled now. The only thing we've got to do now is clean all these parts up. I won't bother showing you guys all that. It's just basically, you know, degreaser and some towels, and that's about it. This should clean up really nicely, and then I'll show you guys later on. We'll go ahead and redo the valve stack, and then we'll get this all put back together, new fluid in there, and then I'll take it over to the bike shop and have them go ahead and give me a charge of nitrogen, and this shock is ready to go back on the bike. So really excited for that. Other than that, the only things we have to do is set the sag and then adjust the high and low speed compression, so we end up giving a nice ride. And we'll have to probably do that once we get out on the trail. We'll just get a good rough estimate based on the manual and get an idea of what they're set at factory, and then we'll go from there and make a little adjustments on that high speed, low speed compressions to give us a little bit better ride. So hope to see you soon. Thank you very much for tuning in, and y'all have a great day. We'll see you on the trails.